Hi, everybody. Today's April 19, 2024. I'm honored to have one of my favorite conversants, Will Reilly, with us today. What's been captivating you, Will?
Well, quite a few things. I mean, in my personal life, I've recently decided to grow up, sort of. So, I mean, and it sounds kind of
Yes.
silly. I just crossed the 40 mark, but I mean, I've started working out a couple of times a week. I mean, seriously, in the way that I did in college with my buddy Brooks. Um, you know, I've basically given up drinking. I don't know. It's not something that I feel obsessive about. I don't know if that's going to stick, but you feel a lot healthier. And
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to, I mean, some major things this year. I mean, my next book, and as usual, my books come out with popular presses. So they have these edgy titles. This one is Lies, Your Liberal Teacher Told You. But that's going to drop. And that's a HarperCollins book. So, I mean, you're talking about presumably a print run of tens or hundreds of thousands. I mean, it's going to be in major bookstores and so on. So I'm excited about that. So just kind of maturity. I mean, would be one of my focuses. Like I've had an interesting life. I've been a manager in the nightlife business. I was organized street canvas crews for a while for all kinds of radical causes. I've traveled to the LDC world. I mean, just although not for any truly lengthy period of time. But I mean, so now I'm kind of stabilizing. Like I'm outside in the background of that farmhouse looking building and all the trees and so on. That's just where I live. I live in Kentucky. So yeah, maturity is a focus of mine. In terms of things going on in the world, I mean, I'm interested in obviously quite a few topics. I mean, that's sort of my professional role. The most recent article I wrote for National Review was on the topic of transgender mass shooters. So I mean, this is not one of the bigger problems in the country, but it is a fascinating trend. I
It's a
mean,
growing, I'd say it's a growing problem.
yeah, no, it's of the most recent. So first of all, this gets into what a mass shooting is, right? So you see the weird, you know what horseshoe theory is, obviously. The horseshoe theory is the idea that the crazy right and the crazy left, because they're so anti-democratic, the inspirations are respectively communism and socialist fascism, often end up saying almost the same thing.
Hmm.
Um, And one of the things that you're hearing a lot from both extremes right now is that there's this epidemic of mass shootings. Everyone from Steve Saylor, although I wouldn't describe him as extreme on every point, but over to who's that on the left? Everytown USA, the anti-gun people that think you should regulate certain knives as well. All of these people are saying, well, they're roughly in the thousands of mass shootings each year. They're almost 1,000 or a little more. And the issue here is that they're using a definition of mass shooting that is extraordinarily broad.
Right.
It's like more gunfire directed at more than three people or more than three people struck by bullets. There's no implication that the people have to be killed.
Right.
There's certainly no understanding there that the shooter has to be a stranger, a gunman, as opposed to a member of a rival gang or your wife or
Yeah.
something like that. So, I mean, you end up with this very large total that includes a substantial percentage of all murders or all attacks in the USA. If you're using this kind of broad lens take, in general, the definition of mass shooting that I and most other academics in the softer sciences would use is the one that's been up on the Mother Jones website for a couple of decades. And that is, more than three people, at least, not including the shooter, killed by a stranger. What you think of as the Columbine kind of situation.
Mhm.
When you look at that definition, there actually are very few mass shootings. I mean, there are 158, I believe, on the list that we usually use in poli-sci and in kind of upper end journalism on this topic. And of those, blah, 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 getting to the point. But in the past, since 2018, there have only been about 50. And of those, now 6, maybe 7, have been committed by trans or non-binary shooters. I mean, Nashville Covenant is just the most notable of them. You had a shooter just the other day, although this isn't on the list. He was stopped, fortunately. But you had a guy just the other day who was planning, a young Asian American male who identified as a woman and had a bevy of guns and planned on shooting up a school. So I wrote a piece about this and said, well, 6 out of 50 is a remarkable number because
Mhm.
only 0.6% of the US population is trans.
Right.
It's
So it's
also
a force
notable.
force multiplier.
Yeah. But I mean, there are a couple things that are really notable about this. Like, one is that most of the shooters were biological females, which is something we've never seen previously. Prior to 2018, you had one bio-female mass shooter. Murder is a young man's game. Um,
Do you think it's testosterone?
I do. I'd be interested in your opinion as a doctor, but yeah, I think I'm not a physician, but yeah, you'd have to imagine. And so there's a broader issue here, and we're going to talk about things well beyond like the trans debate, but this ties into the absurdity to some extent of what we're doing with these kids. So yeah, of the recent shooters, a pretty good number, 6, 7, were transgender and non-binary. More than half of them were female. And yeah, this hasn't been revealed, but you would imagine that the young women in that group were taking testosterone. And we tend for whatever reason to forget this right now, but pure testosterone is a pretty powerful drug. I mean, that's essentially, as I understand, what anabolic steroids are. Like anabol is just synthetic testosterone.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't necessarily call it a drug. I mean, it's a hormone. I mean, people use it as a drug, and so there's. I mean, people take thyroid medication, but really they're just replacing their thyroid. And there are some people. I mean, if you had an orchiectomy, you had cancer in your testicle, or whatever, and because God knows whatever they had to take both off, surgical castration, you would take testosterone to replace it and be replacement. Women, when they hit menopause, they take estrogen as HRT, hormone replacement therapy. So if you're replacing something that wasn't there, or that had been there, that you just lost, fine. So if you have an early, ovarian cancer, and then you are 35 years old and you still want to look, 35 feminine, then you take estrogen. So that's but you take it to modulate. Anyway, this concept where you're adding on to something you already have in terms of the anabolic part is one case, and then taking change, so-called sexual transition, and whatnot. You're giving testosterone to women who've never had it before at all, and it's gonna be a funky thing. It's kind of like if you're used to driving a Toyota, you get into a Ferrari, you press down the accelerator. It's just not the same car. I mean, it's zipping along. And I think that's it's going to be a little bit of funny bends in the road, and you maybe crash into a few things. I think that's kind of like the unfamiliarity of what testosterone is. There's some aggressions that guys work out. There's a great book. I don't want to divert too much, but there's a great book called The War on Football by Daniel J. Flynn. People have been trying to get rid of football for over 100 years because it's violent, blah blah blah. But the question is compared to what? You get rid of football, you got a bunch of violent guys who want to do things to each other, bash each other. So I mean, it's not any kind of coincidence that a fair number of guy sports are violent. People like boxing, they like wrestling. I wrestled and so forth, and God knows it took a lot of aggression out and so forth. Plus, it gives you some confidence and so forth. So they get rid of football. It's not like everyone's going to become get 800s on their SATs because they have all that extra time. They're going to be aggression. So guys work through that. They've been guys forever, and they had a lot of time working it out. They understand bullying. But if you have some girl, well, all of a sudden she's 25, whatever, and then she's taking a bunch of I like my Ferrari analogy. They're used to driving, I don't know, a Honda, a Subaru, and now they got a supercharged one.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much correct. Like, as a man, a lot of or we don't like to put it this way necessarily, but a lot of your early life is spent regulating the urge to have sex constantly and get in brawls. I mean, you learn how to do, but you learn how to be quote unquote a gentleman. You learn how to meditate. Yeah, you learn how to go to the gym and the dojo and take that anger out. I can't imagine having the same intensity of like hormonal lust or the that I had at 17 as a woman that's never experienced that. And trans men, by the way, who also make up a disproportionate number of people in this category, at least broadly defined. But I mean, I would imagine that they have similar issues with estrogen. Like, how do you deal with that cyclical wave of passionate emotion that women describe feeling as a guy? Where, I mean, your responses to things prior to the surgery were often, or prior to the treatment, were often grunts. So, yeah, bro. I mean, what does that do to you? But with the trans men, it does seem to be more intense. I mean, what you're doing is taking my understanding.
Terms, though.
What's up?
Trans men or trans women? I always get confused with this. Which one are we talking about?
Oh, I think it's Chris Rufo who says that the best way to think of the word trans, if you don't mind being a bit rude, is as fake. So a trans man is a woman a female who identifies as a male. So like trans men would be females who are taking, and my understanding of this is that they're taking the male normal dose of testosterone. So I recently considered testosterone replacement therapy, and as far as I could tell, I was basically normal. Like, I was reasonably high T for like a guy who's becoming older, and it's just like I don't really see a need to spend money
Right.
on this. But one of the things that they do is give you your T score, and the average for males is supposed to be between 300 and 1,000. Let's say 700 would be totally typical, as you know. What you're doing with the trans men is, because it's so hard to get a woman's body to look like a man's, you're giving a male typical dose of testosterone, which is going to build muscle. It's going to cause you to grow hair. Breast mass is probably going to shrink. But you're also going to get the level of aggression that would come to a man who has a fully 18-year-old 750 T score. And I would imagine that it's very difficult to deal with all this. Like, you're a young woman, you've traditionally enjoyed normal sex with men in most cases. You suddenly find that that urge has intensified 500%, and you also have a full beard and pythons, like large muscles. Like, what are you doing? Where are you finding partners? Is there
Yeah.
anger at the treatment you're experiencing in society? So I mean, that's something that we see, and we see this massive overrepresentation of this one category among these felony violent shooters. So I wrote about that, and I wrote about that in the broader context also of kind of what the hell are we doing. Like, I was able to read through a very, not a very widely distributed piece, but by a good science reporter from Reuters. And I was able to double check all of the numbers in it with academic sources. So, I mean, I now know the number of kids that have received these transgender treatments, and it's very high. I mean, I think the number I came up with was 19,752 just for top surgeries, which are voluntary double mastectomies, full double mastectomies, and direct hormone replacement, like fully going on puberty blockers and then going on T. So, I mean, many, many, many more people have been socially transitioned, have probably started first stage puberty blockers, so on. But it's crazy. It's a lobotomy number. When people
Yeah.
say we're not doing this to kids, these are 22, 23-year-old males and females that want to do it. No, that's not true. Like, the people in this piece it was only people under 17, as I recall. So it's a crazy thing that we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I've got some kind of quasi-personal stories. I have a friend. You may not believe it, but I have a friend, a few friends here.
Many.
And his daughter. We noticed, a while ago. She was hitting her teens. That's not. She wasn't like voluptuous, but she was growing breasts, whatever. And then it was like one year she was out there in the summer. I said to my wife, it's like, silly question, but this is kind of early in this phenomenon of whether we call it social contagion or rediscoveries. But yeah, she agreed. It's like, anyway, and so this girl is transitioning, and I spoke to her mother about it, and at one point we knew each other a while. She's talking about her child. I said, we'll use a name, X. Is that, X going to college? Like, well, they don't want to really do this. They don't want to do that. Da, 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 da. I'm like, and I know she has a couple of children. I thought the other one had already gone to college. I'm like, well, if they don't want to go for interviews, I mean, which one of them doesn't want to go? She's like, she kind of looked at me strange, like, oh no, X is X is a they. So it's like, oh, because they're at home, but this is after they had this mastectomy, and so it didn't seem to improve whatever situation. And so I started asking, it's like, oh, and she said, well, yeah, they are whatever, doing X, Y, and Z, and they want to become a man, whatever. And it's like, she said, I said, well, what was this? She said, well, X felt uncomfortable about theirs, I don't know, breasts, whatever. She was growing breasts, and I remember being at that stage too. I felt so really uncomfortable about growing breasts. I'm like, so I'm kind of like dot, 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 dot in my head. Like, well, yeah, but you got over it. I mean, you have children, and I don't know if those breasts were put to work in their, genuine kind of biologic functional sense, but, you got married, blah, blah, blah. It's like, what's the thing that it just seems like an odd gap to think that I did this. I got through my uncomfortable, awkward puberty stage, I all of a sudden have these, breasts and people are staring at, whatever. Like, to think that your daughter couldn't. Anyway, that's in a sense water under the bridge, and I think it's going to water that's going to stay under that bridge, because I don't know if you listen to Helen Joyce on this topic, but she says basically when people have made this deep and large a contribution to the movement or whatever, there's no going back. They can't acknowledge failure. They can't acknowledge they're wrong ever.
Yeah, the rest of us are going to have to just tell them that they are and keep it moving, though. But I mean, like, I'd say that's correct. Yeah, like if you cut off your young son's penis, and give him an artificial vagina that is made with intestine, and this, I mean, yes, there's a dark element to this, like Byzantine eunuch stuff at the margins. But I mean, in fact, eunuch is now recognized by the APA, as I understand, as a gender category. You can want to become a eunuch by getting a voluntary double orchiectomy. So having your balls cut off and retaining a bit of a penis and then just living life. I mean, and that's considered to be a proper treatment for your gender dysphoria. Yes, I would imagine that someone who helped their firstborn son do this would have a pretty significant amount of either guilt or a survivor's need to say that it was absolutely necessary for the rest of their life. But yeah, like I've actually read the academic research on this and the medical research on this, and yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's not even contested. Between 69 and 92% of kids who experience gender dysphoria, per probably the 15 best studies on point, I'm thinking of a meta-analysis here, just get over it. Yeah, they get through that. And I would imagine, especially for women, I'm not trying to be quote unquote simpish or sympathetic in only one direction here, but as a woman, puberty has to be pretty horrifying. I mean, your vagina starts bleeding. I mean, it takes on the things you associate with that in adulthood. There's hair growing all over it, has a notable odor, although not one that men and lesbians find unpleasant. You start having these things start coming out of your chest. You can't run with the boys anymore. Older, creepy guys start looking at you. I mean, every female friend that I've ever had has described that. You're like 14, you're in the park. They're dudes that are like 20 driving by, staring over. I mean, or beyond that age. So, I mean, there has to be a level of temptation when someone says, well, I can give you this pill that'll stop this. It'll delay it until you're mentally ready. You can never go through it at all. You can be a tough male warrior. I mean, yes, that has to be appealing. The reality is that in order to do a bunch of things, like from have a clitoral orgasm to get a husband, you have to remain a woman and progress on into adulthood. You can't seal your vagina shut, which is, again, part of the most extreme female procedure here. This stuff is extremely painful, and get a fake penis made out of skin and fat from your thigh. Now that's not going to, in most cases, help you mature into mentally stable adulthood. So yeah, up to 90% of these kids will just get through this phase if they're just allowed to get through this phase. What happened, in my opinion, was that activists really commandeered this whole discussion and started pumping out what was, you can call it the hard affirmational model. But like if a kid comes into your office and you're a doctor or you're a psychiatrist with the ability to prescribe, what you're supposed to do is not, and this is still the standard, by the way, at least in most states, you're not supposed to ask about any contributing factor. Sexual abuse, I would imagine, would be an obvious one for young women. Just discontentment with puberty, anything like this. Are you a cutter? Most of these people are. There's a button, Christina Buttons Lives on Twitter, Buttons Lives, has pointed out that there's something like a 60% overlap with severe autism, with PTSD style trauma, so on, and gender dysphoria. But you're not supposed to pursue any of that. You're just supposed to say, okay, you say you're a boy. Well, you're a boy, and this is what boys do. And you then recommend a suite of behaviors from transitioning in dress, which basically just means adopting the corniest male stereotypes. You see a lot of baseball caps and like willingness to scuffle, but anywhere from that to, again, voluntary double mass, so on down the line. And again, I bluntly think it's an awkward topic to talk about, but I think this is going to be treated as lobotomy in 20 years. Like they're going to be a lot of these people that have full beards, that are female, that have gone through something very similar to clitoridectomy, that have these fake penises hanging from their stomach, that are going to be speaking and saying it's amazing that this was done to me, in my opinion.
I remember when clitoridectomy was a thing that the medical community was railing against in the 90s, I believe, maybe late 80s. And that was like on the front page, how horrible it is that Egypt, I mean, they have automobiles and telephones and whatnot. Cairo is a relatively modern place, but in Egypt, they're allowing clitoridectomies. You're taking away the women's ability to have sexual pleasure, blah, 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 how horrible, how gruesome, how mutilatory, how bad, 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 bad. And it goes on, certain places nearby, I guess Sudan, this and that. I'm not sure the actual, geographic map. It coincides with Islam, but I'm not sure. I don't think all of Islam does that. Anyway, it was a big deal. I see nothing about that, no discussions about that at all. It's like, I think you've lost the ability to criticize the oddities of doing clitoridectomies if you're doing, frankly, worse and more. And you're doing it in pursuit. You're not even leaving the female form. You're pursuing, this, to kind of borrow a religious term, you're pursuing this false idol. You can never reach this thing. You can't become a man. I can't become, one of my kids, when he was young, insisted everyone called him Batman. He was like 4 years old. I'm not joking.
Classic. Yeah.
He became completely ornery. He would walk away and not engage with you if you didn't call him Batman, and address him as the Batman. And he assumed he had all the powers and whatnot. And within his, was jumping off things and flying, kind of like dashing around. It was charming and so forth. But he would get really irritated, if you didn't use his proper pronoun as Batman. And the Batman, whatever, but there's something to go through, and that's neither here nor there. But it's an absurdity. But this kind of like application where you can think you can become something, you can't become a man. You can't transition. That all these terms are weird, and it's odd to me that medicine kind of folds at this, and everyone's supposed to all. I've signed in. Unfortunately, I don't know if you know about this, but I'm getting older. And I hope it doesn't happen to you, but
happens to the best of us, really.
Yeah, and so I signed in for certain medical visits, and now they all want to have a pre-sign, so like it's like your boarding pass for your airlines. Ask a couple of questions. What are you carrying on board? But in this case, it's everybody around here. It's like, what's your gender? What do you want to be called? Da da da. Are you a man? And they give you, it's not MF anymore. It's like there's like 7 choices of what I can be, and apparently my new gender is prefer not to say. That's like that's actually my preferred ethnicity. It's my preferred, you name it. That's prefer not to say. That's pretty much, maybe I'll put that in my bio.
That's actually, so I mean, first of all, that's really funny. That's a good dinner speaker sort of joke that I might steal. Like, yeah, I'm here representing my preferred ethnicity, prefer not to say, my preferred gender, rather not talk about it, my tax status, none of your business. I mean, I actually think that's a good approach to sex, social class, so on down the line. So cool, thanks for sharing that one. But in terms of I do think there are 2 very serious points here. One is when you say you can't transition, that's something brutal but honest. And it's good to hear you as a medical pro say it. I've heard more and more friends going to events like Gen Spec that are psychologists, that are doctors. Yeah, the reason we now know, we looked at this new study from Sweden. I don't want to miscite the authors, but that came out less than a year ago. And I mean, this is the first large N study to really track a cohort through transition. And then for the normal 10 years or so, I'd imagine you'd use to measure regret and see whether they felt better, whether their mental issues had been cured by transition. And what it found was no. As I recall, suicidality was higher. There were plenty of other issues that still existed at the same level. Are you content with your newly gendered body? No, I think some kind of small insect just flew into my eye, by the way, but whatever.
Yeah.
We'll deal with nature out here. I'll just look silly for a second. But basically, yeah, what the study found was that there was no significant difference in behaviors or more importantly, in kind of attitude, suicidal ideation, etc., after a standard 10-year waiting period.
Yeah.
And that doesn't surprise me at all. And the reason for this, in my opinion, is that you can't actually become the opposite sex. So, I mean, like, if your feeling is you're a man, you're this big, burly, blonde, Nordic guy, and you should be a beautiful woman named Desiree, it might at first be very tempting to say, okay, well, I'm going to get breast implants that will make me into Desiree. I'm going to take estrogen that will make me look more like the person I want to be. But the problem is that there's still going to be all of these issues. I mean, there are entire Reddit forums devoted to how you can tell what gender someone actually is, and race and so on as well. But I mean, large hands, Adam's apples, you probably still have a penis, and so are you going to fix all that? Are you going to, excuse the language, chop off your cock? Are you going to get feminization surgery of your entire face? Like, just looking at me and you, like two ordinary guys, like I'm not going to pass as a woman. Like, there's a hey bro element to my features,
Well, yeah,
shoulders.
yeah. I forget who it was. It was some child where they were talking about this on, and I think in school, and she got punished because she said if you come upon a graveyard and somehow excavate or whatever inadvertently, you can identify every male and female, young and old, and you take out the pelvis, and they're just different. I mean that makes sense because we all had to kind of squeeze through the birth canal, and so women have wider hips, and this kind of equalization where they're supposed to be in the military, they're supposed to be guarding huge 6'4" angry prisoners, all that kind of stuff. It always leads to mayhem, and it's a craziness. In women's sports, there are far more ACL injuries per mile run, per sport done. So I'm not saying there are more men getting it because more men do more active things, but on a proportional basis per activity, women get more ACL tears, and it comes down simply because their legs are men's legs are kind of straight up and down. We're more linear creatures, and women, because they have the wider hips, their legs come down angled inwards, and so when they're running, they're going to have more torsional pressure. If you ever had Thanksgiving, you can pull off the drumstick. You need to put that lateral pressure on it, so they get the ACL, which is and so they're not necessarily built for the same stuff. Obviously, people you have this thing now where Caitlin Clark's not getting as much as Victor Wembanyama. She's getting like I don't know, 100th or 1,000th of what he's making. But it's not the same sport. They're not doing the same stuff. People don't watch it for the same reason. They're not seeing the best athletes on earth. We have yet to see a woman, whatever form, on whatever hormones, play in the NBA, and you never will. You might very well see, and you've seen obviously men, dominate and ruin women's sports.
Yeah, no, I mean that's exactly correct. Like, and I think that's the reason why gender dysphoria is so hard to deal with. Like, there are hundreds, I don't know the exact number, thousands of differences between men and women. Like, every cell in your body is chromosomally coded to reflect your sex. Like, 23andMe actually has a whole kind of apologetic page where these professional geneticists are forced to talk about this nonsense. And they say, like, yes, if you identify as trans and you submit your genetic profile to 23andMe, please tell us that you are trans so we won't list your sex on your results.
Offend you.
Yeah, because all we can do is find your biological sex. There's no genetic coding for the gender of non-binary, sapiosexual, or whatever. And we will always know your biological sex. A blood sample, a urine sample, a saliva sample will all reveal it. I mean, so it's darkly funny, but yeah, you can never get through all those differences. And so 10 years later, if you got top but not bottom surgery as a male and you're living in female dress every day, I mean, you look down and you see nuts. I mean, you see burly legs that took you through a high school varsity career. I mean, there's no way to get around it. And I think the real way to treat this would be to focus on, the problem isn't hardware not matching software, if you will. It's software not matching hardware. So it seems to me the best way to look at this would be to treat, and that's fairly original, but not wholly. I mean, I've heard people say it in debates at conferences and so on. The best way to treat this, it strikes me, would be to talk about the mental condition of gender dysphoria. You feel this way, and you can dress however you want. This isn't an especially homophobic society anymore, but you have to respect women's spaces. You have to do this and that because you are not actually a member of the other sex. Right. Whatever you think your gender might be.
The whole phrase is axiomatically oxymoronic. That is to say, I like that, axiomatically oxymoronic. That could be in my new rock and roll band. Nobody would show up. Nobody would be able to buy the albums because they can't pronounce it. But basically, you can't be a member of the opposite X because then it takes away the word opposite. So an imaginary number can't be the number one, just by definition, because you've already. Anyway, I do agree with you. I think the software problem, as it were, the brain is not really software; it's softer than other parts of your body, but it is the you that's you. When you see that woman, Ash, the guy who's dressed as woman, arguing with Ben Shapiro and wants to take him out and punch him up or kill him. And you see there's a guy at a convenience store. It's like, call me ma'am. I'm sure you've seen that video. Those are human beings who have male brains, and whatever else you want to put on it is not going to change that. That's a male aggression, and there's no shortage of that kind of acting out. It's like, you're not calling me a woman, I'm going to beat your face in. I mean, that is not a woman thing. And it's also kind of ironic, since we kind of mentioned race peripherally, that race and ethnicity, which are a blur, we all have we're all mutts of one type or another. And I mean, with the exception of Liz Warren, but if you are Liz Warren, you say you're and you try to profit by the spoil system to say you're American Indian, Native American, or you're Rachel Dolezal and you want to head the NCAA, but you're white, or I think the Sean White, who should have changed his name first to Sean Black. Any of these people, it's like that's a problem. No, you are not Black. No, you unless what it serves their purpose, like George Zimmerman being a white Hispanic or whatever it happens to be. But these things are somehow like these categories, these silos that people are in, and sex, which is an actual category and silo, it's binary, and you can't be non-binary when there are only two things. That is somehow a blur. So you mess with the language. I mean, just the phrase non-binary is there's two types of people, binary and non-binary. Well, that means there's three types.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's pretty much correct. I mean, simply put, the reason you can't be transracial, according to activists, is that would completely destroy the grift. I mean, and I can see this from both sides. Like, I'm a Black guy. I still do see some residual racism in society. But I recognize how my group of friends benefited from affirmative action and so on. So there's this whole thing set up with the two sides and kind of World War I era trench positions when it comes to race. And it would completely end an annoying but ongoing conflict for white guys just to be able to say, I'm Black. Like, that's the end of it. If you can identify as Black, there's then this entire world that opens up. Can you apply for a society or for a scholarship offered by the Society of Black Mechanical Engineers? Like, it's just over. There's no affirmative action. There's no reparations. It's impossible to distinguish who's a real Black person from a fake Black person using IDs and so on. So I think that's why that has to be stopped. Like, yeah, in reality, now the thing that's interesting about this is you can make the same claims about sex. Like, when people say, well, Black people are in one legal sense the recipients of affirmative action benefits from society, that's also true for women. I mean, if you were to say, well, Black people are in one legal sense a group that's been terribly abused by society that could make a Clade level reparations claim, I mean, that's also true for women. So I don't really see that many differences. One of the things that is a distinguisher here is that the major feminist groups are almost all not just politically, but culturally left. And so when the trans argument started to be made, like, okay, we've identified a group that's even more oppressed and isolated than women, and all other good women should support this group, feminists who are more empathic, who are mostly social liberals, just went along with it. And so they kind of got eaten out from the inside. I mean, like, all of these people, all of this huge chunk of people that identifies like, beyond the B is what it's often said, like T, Q, K for kink, plus, like, all those people just started moving into the feminist and gay movement. Like, yeah, this is ours now. You let us in. So feminists are caught in there. It's actually a huge split between like lib fems and TERFs, I'm sure you know, where like, a bunch of feminists are saying, no, look, like, we don't hate men, but the whole point of feminism is we think we're still somewhat oppressed, and we want these policies against prostitution, hardcore pornography, discrimination in the workplace. And then there's another bunch of feminists, because they let in all the sex workers, all the men who identify as women, so on. They're like, no, I happen to be a whore who is non-binary, and let me tell you. And so, like, the organizations can't come to coherent votes on anything. Like, as a guy, it is funny. But I mean, it's also very,
yeah. It's funny. There's a category called when I didn't invent this term, but I'm not. It's not a great term, but when liberal pieties collide.
Oh yeah.
You have all these things that they can't possibly work together, and a lot of the times there's a pretend element, like what you see now with gays for Hamas. There's this pretend aspect because we're all against the man, whoever that is. It might be me actually.
Like guy in a tie, huh?
Yeah, I'm wearing a tie. You know, I'm less tan than you, etc. Anyway, but it's like so we're all against the man, and the man, I guess, is Israel, I guess, although they weren't the man. You know, in World War II, Germany, or 20th century, or during the Inquisition or whatever. Now, I always tell people, it's like I'm Jewish. It's like, yeah, since we control the world, I think we should do a far better job at it. Since we control the press, we should really get better opinion pieces for Israel. Yeah, we're doing a crappy job of controlling the world and the narrative because it doesn't seem to be working out. I'll demonstrate anyway. But it's but obviously the liberal piety collides, and we would collide in real time if the gay wound up in Hamas land, Hamasistan, or Hezbollah or ISIS land, or whatever, whatever piece of Lebanon, Gaza, etc. It's not gonna work out. And all these concepts of I'm binary, queer, latte, coca, mocha latte grande, whatever you happen to be at that moment, that's not going to work out in Ramallah. It's not going to work out even in Oman. It's not going to work out in Cairo. It's not going to work. You can just go off the ISIS route to standard Khartoum or whatever, and it's not going to work out for you. But this is with whom, no pun intended, you want to go to bed. I don't know how that works out.
Yeah, I think it's a strategic miscalculation. So, I mean, Barack Obama called this the coalition of the fringes, which is still the best term I've heard for it. But the idea is we can take everyone that feels outside the mainstream and unify them together and take down the mainstream. But there are a couple of problems with that. Like, first of all, if you throw in women or even feminists, the percentage of people that are outside the mainstream is like 80% of the population. So it's everyone, and it's people that really are in no way suffering at all. The Black business community, Asians, upper class wives. I mean, it doesn't make sense. But the idea is you're going to take down, basically it is you. It would be the educated coastal or Great Lakes white guy in a suit and tie. That's who, every time you see a villain depicted in posters going back to Occupy, that's who it is. And, the white guy or the Jewish guy is holding like a bag of money in one hand and the world in the other. So that's the idea. We're going to go against the bankers or the 1%, the white lairds, like the different ways it's put. And we're going to take them down with the COF, the Coalition of the Fringes. I mean, I've been blah, blah, blahing about this a little. The problem, just very simply, is that the members of the Coalition of the Fringes have nothing in common and hate one another.
Right.
So, I mean, there's nothing that feminism and Islam have in common.
What's that?
No, I said I wasn't coming up with like a very clever example. I'm saying that there's nothing that feminism and Islam have in common. Yeah. There's nothing that small union workers and illegal immigrants have in common.
I know, it's crazy.
There's nothing that trans
the Democrat Party
women.
In England, literally, they call their Democrat Party the Labour Party. And how is it working out for Labour? The people who are Labour in England, where the Labour Party would ostensibly be Labour, came from Labour. They don't want to vote for them because they don't care about the people there who have jobs and so forth. They're the nice word for crapped upon. They're just there's a kind of the Democrats have turned into globalists, and they're getting I think they're frankly bribed. It's kind of a mafiocracy. They are getting money, kind of the system. They're eating the trout and they're just churning stuff. And the actual working man, this concept of populism. Is totally by the wayside. And there's a huge disdain for the working man everywhere. And the funny thing, I was just thinking of the late, I think he's late, Robert Mugabe. Yeah. When Rhodesia, there's two Rhodesias. There was North and South. And South Rhodesia, Harare government, I guess there was, what was the name of that town before? I forget. Anyway, when they got rid of Ian Smith, and put in Mr. Mugabe 1,000 years ago, and the whites pretty much left. Crime disappeared, inequity disappeared. The world got better, prosperity turned into Wakanda. Am I right?
Not quite. No.
So you take away the white man, and things are not better in the Congo. I'm not saying it would be better if there were whites there, but it's like. Humans are humans. I mean, for goodness sakes, like, we're all ostensibly made in the image of God, and we have our issues. We have good stuff and bad stuff, and it doesn't really fall along racial aspects. I mean, every group of people have had the same problem. The reason the Bible resonates, even though it's written thousands of years ago for tribes, without cell phones and from what I understand, without the internet even, but the stories resonate because humans have been doing human crap. And whether some tribe you can't pronounce the name of or not, these stories resonate. We're really a creature of stories, and we're a creature of relationships and so forth. And these things are people are trying to go into very strange little cul-de-sacs, not just surgically, but emotionally. And they're doing this for the rest of their lives. They're doing it at age 15 or 20 for the rest of their lives. And the numbers don't go backwards and the surgeries don't go backwards. And it's just so ill-advised for physicians to do this. Dr. Mengele could not even have thought of some of this stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, the last line I think is a good closing line. Like, yeah, we are now, because of the current upper middle class religious philosophy, doing things that would have made some of the Nazis and most of the Inquisition blush. The justification is, well, it's good. I mean, it's we can't disenfranchise the already minoritized or something. But I'm sure the Inquisition and the Nazis had lengthy written quasi-philosophical justifications for what they were doing. In fact, I know they did. I've read them. So yeah, that's one point. I think the broader issue with the coalition of the fringes model is that it just can't work. It includes everybody. The groups dislike one another. And the Mugabe thing is actually a worthwhile point, because another obvious issue is, if you're a leader and you're a competent one, we both probably fall in this category, that you're not just doing things to do them, you're doing things for a practical reason, which is that you think they'll improve society. And whether or not you think that our society today is a bit unfair to minorities or a bit unfair to whites, if you look at affirmative action, the reality is that our society today works pretty well. So when you look at something like, would implementing a more socialist country with a Congress mandatorily made up 40% plus of members of minority groups and so on down the line, other crazy things that have been thrown out by the AOCs of the world, would that improve life for the people in the country? No, of course not. Would reparations improve life for the non-black 88% of the country? No, of course not. So there's a point, not only that this group of people working together don't have anything in common, but also a more important point, that the solutions they want are bad. And hopefully people continue to pay attention to that going forward.
Yeah, I think we're heading out, rounding out the hour here. So I appreciate your time. I just wanted to pop in the thing we mentioned earlier, but I'm working on an article on let's see, what do we got here? This is just for people to find you. This is your Twitter feed, and so you're Wilfred Reilly, and you've got this. I'm not going to quote it there, but people can find you. And the thing I wanted to talk about was we were talking about earlier. There's an article I hope to publish soon, and I'll leave the venue unnamed yet, but I think I have a spot for this. But my article is on the mist, the unknown or neglected first wave of the opioid epidemic. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but if you go to the CDC, you'll see three waves of the opioid epidemic. They're all in the 21st century: OxyContin, cheaper heroin, fentanyl. But they're missing the original bump. The first wave was 1970s, and this basically coincided with methadone. Whether it was from methadone, we can't really say. But this is an actual wave. These are gradual increases, and your plants are growing here. The analogy I come up with is, in order to have plants grow, you need good soil. This was the soil laid. And if you look even deeper, before we get to this, the actual there was actually basically no narcotic usage in the United States between World War II and 1960 or so. And it had gone down from opium use in the early 20th century down to zero. And then it grew and massively up further than before. But the part I was going to talk about was about race, we were mentioning earlier, is that akin to that Winston Churchill quote, where socialism is basically the equality of misery. This was 1960s heroin usage, which was a tiny fraction, probably 1/100th of what we have today. 35,000 narcotic addicts in the country, and half of them were in New York City, which was only 4% of the population at the time. And so non-whites, which in this case pretty much only Black Americans, African American, comprised almost half of the entire usage at the time in the country. This number looks like it's going down. Everyone's getting better amongst the non-whites. But in fact, the number stayed the same, which was 7 times higher than the whites. And what's changed is that whites have gotten 7 times more likely to use opioids. I just put that out there. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And maybe we'll have that for another day.
I'd love to come back on and talk about that just briefly. I think that's interesting. That's something I've obviously published, but it's something I've never really thought about before. And so you're saying part of the cause of this death was the introduction. Well, actually, I'll just say what I think is most notable about this. I mean, so it seems like you're saying part of the cause of this rise in death was the introduction of methadone into society, so on down the line. But like looking at the graphics that are in the piece from sources like JAMA Psychiatry and so on, one of the things that's worth noting is that prohibition seemed to have worked, or the general culture of kind of opprobrium around drug use, around binge drinking. It looked like one of those graphs is from the y-axis site, getting your drink on or whatever. But what you saw was in the early 1900s, you had a bunch of drunks, I assume as well, but you had a bunch of probably at the time opium smokers. You had more than 500,000 of these addicts across the big cities. And that drops to 0. I mean, you told me the figure's probably about 30,000, low but measurable. But then it increases into the millions as we go toward this disease model, treatment model of addiction. And that's something that we've seen over and over. I mean, the great Tom Sowell has a whole book about this, The Vision of the Anointed, where he says that in our society, we've consistently seen these waves of experts looking at very minor problems like teen pregnancy in the 1940s and saying a specific thing, which is that we need to resolve this by destigmatizing the behavior causing it and looking for the root causes. So there was teen pregnancy, there was welfare use, you've got drug addiction here, so on down the line. And in every case, what you basically see is that after the destigmatization, fully explain the behavior, remove the opprobrium model was adopted, while, the root causes were being hunted for OJ style, you see just this 1,000% increase in the thing. So, I mean, like, obviously, I pay attention to the Black family as a, Black or mixed businessman. Black illegitimacy has not been a long-term national problem in the USA. Black families used to be more stable than ethnic white families. It's not disputed. What happened is that in 1938, the Black illegitimacy rate's about 11%. And you see the first pre-Great Society welfare programs. By 1960, when Senator Moynihan wrote, it's a 21%. And from that point forward, as you go into the Great Society, as you go into the sexual revolution, as you go into what's called Cloward Piven, the welfare distributional strategy, you get up to, our peak was 73% out of wedlock birth, which is insane.
Yeah,
I mean, well ahead of rate. Yeah, so this is a pattern we've seen before.
You're right. You're spot on. It's basically, progressives ruin everything. And the analogy is there that, people, I mean, Charles Murray covers this really well in Coming Apart. You read that? The white elite, or it could be any elite, but at that time it was white. The white elite has all these ideas about how to fix the impoverished, and they apply kind of a libertine motif to them. So they give them the free drugs, they give them the free methadone, free needles, free condoms. This and that, and they're imputing, to quote Michael Gerson, their soft bigotry of low expectations. They don't think that the underclass can figure life out the way they have and the way they did, and they need these extra special helpers to deal with their urges and so forth. I kind of think it's a jungly aspect. To use Spike Lee kind of terminology. I personally think that the methadone, as a concept, emanated from fear of the Black man pouring into the wealthier neighborhoods in New York City in crime. I think if it happened somewhere else, if there was some different distribution, we wouldn't have seen. In fact, that New York City was kind of the intellectual, theoretical, theorizing capital of the United States, if not the world at the time in the 1960s. They felt threatened by a rise in crime, and it was coming from Black neighborhoods, and I think as the other in a sense. And they had this fear, and they didn't think that those urges could be canceled out by any other way except by giving them what they wanted. And maybe if we gave them what they wanted, they won't do any crime. I think it's an appeasement strategy. It's kind of Neville Chamberlain comes to opium.
That's a really great line, and I've probably got to fade out of the pod in a second. But yeah, I think one of my final comment would probably be, what's interesting here is what hasn't been tried. And I think when you ask, well, what could solve these terrible problems in Black communities or poor white communities, a good starting point would be the solutions that the members of the upper class would apply to themselves and their families if they had these problems. I mean, like, neither of us is poor. I mean, I have friends that have had kids struggle with drug addiction. What do? You throw the kid in a tough rehab facility where he can't get drugs. So he goes cold turkey and is miserable and stops taking drugs.
That's a funny thing.
I mean, like, it's, you know, you get a good psychologist on it. I mean, he goes to jail. I mean, like, there are set specific solutions that any normal person would implement if their wife became a drug addict. You've got to go here for this period of time and dry out or it's over. I mean, if we did the same things with quote unquote the poors, we would find the same positive results. We did find the same positive results. That's the thing. I mean, that graphic where there were 0 visible heroin addicts, that includes Black people. That includes Irish and Italian Americans in the cities. It includes Mexican immigrants starting to come in. None of those people were doing all this dope either. So if we already know what works, there's this weird pseudo-moral argument that we shouldn't be able to do it because it's somehow bad or harsh. And I totally reject that. Like, it's much worse or harsher to force poor women to live with drug addicted boyfriends and so on than it is to make people not take heroin. So a final note there, probably.
All right, perfect. So thank you so much for coming on. I usually try to put a self-promotional note up. I'm not sure I'm going to have time here, but if you want to help support my podcast, go find my book, Overturning Zika. It's on Amazon. I hope to have a book on narcotics actually out in next year or so about how to get out of the addiction maze. And I got one on cancer, but there's another topic. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time. I love talking with you.
I'm talking with you as well. Have a good day.